Hi, today we're going to be looking at classifying triangles. You've seen this before, so this shouldn't be new except for maybe one little bit. Okay? Triangles can be classified in two different ways. They can be classified using their side lengths and by using their angle measures. Okay? So the charts below in these notes are going to show us how to classify triangles by their angles and by their sides. The first one we're looking at reminds us how to classify triangles using just the sides. So if all three sides of my triangle are different, then remember we call that scalene. There are no congruent sides. Okay, nothing congruent. In an isosceles triangle, we have at least two congruent sides. So isosceles, at least two congruent. And we can tell they're congruent because remember, the short lines on the side of the triangle show that these sides are congruent or equal in length. So this little tick mark here shows that it's congruent to that one there. I do have two congruent sides. That is an isosceles triangle. Okay? My equilateral triangle is going to be three congruent sides. So every single triangle can be classified as either scalene, isosceles, or equilateral, and we'll use our tick marks to determine whether or not we have congruent triangle or congruent sides. If you don't have tick marks, then you'll need a couple of other things. You'll either need numbers, so let's say I had a 7 here and a 7 here, or you'll need notification that your picture is to scale, and then you can measure with a ruler. If they don't tell you it's to scale, then you can't assume it's to scale and go grab a ruler. So I couldn't look at this one and say, oh, let me go grab a ruler, because nowhere here does it tell me my pictures are to scale. Okay? And then this other little note is something that sometimes we forget and we kind of overlook it. An equilateral triangle, so this one here, is a special isosceles triangle. So the equilateral triangle is really just another isosceles triangle because the definition for isosceles says at least two congruent sides. So that means then it says at least it can have more than two. So it can have all three congruent. Okay? So if you have an assignment and it says what is the classification and you're given this triangle and you classify it as isosceles, that's not technically wrong. It is correct. However, if your question says what's the best classification, then you do have to go with equilateral because it is more specific to classify this as equilateral than to classify it as isosceles. Okay? So we can classify triangles using the sides. There are three classifications to choose from. When you're looking at angles, we also learned three, when we learned our classification of triangles in middle school, we learned three classifications using angles. We have our acute triangles because they have three acute angles. We have the right triangle, which only has one right angle because you can't have all three be right because if I make a right angle and then I make another right angle and then I make a third right angle, I'll end up with four sides and I'll be a rectangle instead of a right triangle, right? So it can only have one right angle. The other two are going to end up always being acute, okay? And then my obtuse triangle has one obtuse angle, okay? So it's going to have one angle that's going to be bigger than 90. So it can be like 100 degrees or something bigger than 90. Okay, I just made up that 100 so we could show that it was definitely obtuse. Again, for the same reason the right triangle can only have one right angle, your obtuse triangle can only have one obtuse angle. Okay? Now these are the three we learned in middle school, but we're going to add one more on. An angle with three equal angles is classified as equiangular. An angle with three equal angles is classified as equiangular. Just like you have equilateral, lateral means sides. If you think about your lats, those are the muscles on the sides. Okay, if you throw a lateral pass, that means you're throwing it to the side. You can't throw it forward down the field. Okay, so lateral means side, so equal sides, and then angle or angular means angle, so equiangular means equal angles. Okay? So every single triangle, if they don't specifically ask you to classify by sides or by angles, every single triangle has two classifications. So when you're asked to identify or to classify a triangle, you should always be giving two answers unless you don't have enough information. Okay? So it says classify the triangles below using angles and sides. Circle the angle and side name. Pictures are to scale. So I do know I could get out a ruler and I could get out a protractor so that I can test these angles and sides. Okay? However, this first one, I can see the tick marks. So I've got a tick mark here and I've got a tick mark here. So I know I have at least two congruent sides. So I know it's at least isosceles. If I measure the other side, so this is a little more than 2 centimeters. So those two are a little more than 2 centimeters. And then this one is a little more than 1 centimeters, about almost 1.5 centimeters. So this side is not the same as these two, so it's not equilateral. It is isosceles. And then my angles, when I line up with this side, I can see this angle doesn't go all the way to 90, so this one's acute. When I line up on the other side, I have another acute angle. And then if I come up here, this angle is also only open between 30 and 40 degrees. So this one's also acute. So all my angles are acute. And this triangle has two congruent sides, so it's isosceles. Okay, let's look at this last one here. On the last one, I can see I have a right angle. So I don't even have to get out my protractor. Because of that little box, I know I have a right triangle. And since my picture is to scale, I can use my ruler to measure. So when I measure this side, I have about 1.2 or 1.3, something like that, centimeters. When I measure this one, all my stuff's in the way over here. Good thing I have a bendy ruler. This one's about 2.5 centimeters, about 2.5 centimeters. And then my last one down here is about 2 centimeters. So all of these are different, which means this one is scalene. Okay? So when you're asked to name or describe a triangle, you should give both names. This triangle is an acute isosceles triangle. Or you could put it the other way around and say this is an isosceles acute triangle. This triangle is a right scalene triangle, or we could call it a scalene right triangle. The order we name them in doesn't matter, or the order we describe them in does not matter. Okay? In the next video, we're going to just do a little bit more practicing with naming, and then we're going to kind of look at when we can assume things and when we cannot. Okay? Thank you so much for watching.